Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenborough, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Liverpool by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha and Andros Townsend after the game. So let's begin. Crystal Palace fell to a 2-1 defeat against Liverpool at Selhurst Park, despite the Eagles putting in an impressive 90 minutes to saw a late Roberto Firmino goal cancel out a Wilfried Zaha equaliser moments earlier. Liverpool started fast at Selhurst Park, and on 9 minutes the Reds' impressive start was almost rewarded, with Mané starting and finishing a move that was heroically blocked by James Tompkins from 12 yards out. The game then turned, and an Andros Townsend-led spell of dominance began for the Eagles. Firstly, the Palace winger dribbled himself away from three chasing Liverpool players to free Chiquitati down the right flank. Chiati's cross was deep but collected by Wilfried Zaha on the other side of the penalty box, with Zaha setting up Luka Milivojevic for a decent outside of the box effort that kick-started the sustained spell of pressure for Palace. Townsend was again finding a lot of joy up against Trent Alexander-Arnold and was instrumental in Palace winning back-to-back corners as Selhurst Park began to realise Liverpool was struggling to cope with Roy Hodgson's side. On 16 minutes, another Chiati cross created a fantastic volleyed opportunity for Jordan Ayew, with the centre midfielder chipping a perfectly weighted ball onto the right boot of the on-rushing Ayew, the effort going narrowly wide in what could have been a delightfully worked Palace goal. Palace remained comfortable and looked more threatening for the rest of the first half, and were fully deserving of the lead that Tompkins thought he had given the South Londoners from a Milivojevic free kick. However, VAR stepped in to rob the centre-back of his first league goal since scoring against the same opposition back in January of this year. Ayew was adjudged to have pushed Liverpool's Dejan Lovren, who wasn't involved in the phase of play that saw Gini Wijnaldum flick on Milivojevic's cross into Tompkins' path. The Eagles were made to rule not making their impressive first 45 minutes count, with Mané giving Jurgen Klopp's side the lead via both goalposts, after Facentagaitis' fingertips came so close to keeping the effort out. Despite trailing against a run of play, the Eagles continued to probe, with Milivojevic having a couple of long-range efforts either side of a great effort from Townsend that Alisson tipped over. Klopp looked to reassert the league leader's dominance in the game by bringing on Divock Origi for Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain in the 65th minute. The personnel change saw the Reds grow back into the game, with Guaita pulling off a fine save with the odds stacked heavily in the favour of the clean through-on goal Roberto Firmino. Hodgson reacted to his counterpart in the rivals' dugout change by bringing on Jeffrey Slupp and Martin Kelly for Chiquitati and Joe Ward, with the latter leaving the field of play due to injury. Slupp's entrance was almost an inspired one, with Townsend's delicate tee-up for his teammate from 30 yards, sending Alisson scrambling across the goal from a low-fist effort from Slupp. Townsend was again at the centre of the positive play from the Eagles, this time making a darting run to the edge of the area before clipping the ball over Andy Robertson's head to James McArthur on the right-hand side of the box. McArthur sent the ball back into Christian Benteke, who had just replaced Ayew, with the striker going close with a spectacular overhead kick. Finally, in the 85th minute, Palace got what it deserved as a minimum with a fantastic team goal. Zaha freed Benteke down the right flank after holding off several Liverpool players. Benteke found Townsend in the box, who then found Zaha, who fired home from just outside the 6-yard box. A breaking play had a few nervy moments, where Palace thought they might have to play with 10 men due to an injury to Tompkins, having made all 3 subs. Thankfully, the defender managed to carry on. However, the stoppage interrupted the Eagles' flow, and Firmino headed home to restore Liverpool's lead almost instantly, after capitalising on Palace's failure to clear their line swiftly. The full-time whistle went, and Palace can feel aggrieved not to have taken something from a game they dominated for large spells. So I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts, whether that be on Twitter or Facebook, then of course do head over to the respective sites and of course follow our accounts on there. Now, obviously, alongside the latest sort of general Palace news, whether that be about the academy, about, you know, ongoings in regards to the stadium, you know, things like that. Obviously, if you do want to keep up to date with all the latest news, then of course do give us a follow on there, because we regularly update it with all the latest articles and links to all different things. And of course, alongside that, we also post the transfer news as well. So even though we're not quite in January yet, there's going to be lots of rumours surrounding players coming in and out. So if you want a place to get all the sort of general news as well as the transfer news about players coming in or out, you know, as well as sort of interviews as well, you know, whether that be with players, whether that be with management, whether that be with agents in particular linking to transfers, lots of rumours, you know, come from agents. So if you are someone who wants a place to get all the general news, the transfer news, the interviews, and obviously our opinion as well, because of course before the game, after the game, we give our opinion, we react to things that happen in the game, we react to injury news. So if you do want all the play, basically a new Palace account where you can follow all of this, follow us so you can get all of this stuff all in one account, then of course do head over to our respective sites at Crystal Palace. And you know, like I've said, in particular coming into the January transfer window, if you do want a place to get up to date with all of the latest transfer news, of course give us a follow there. Now, a great place for you guys to share your opinion is of course in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, obviously where you rate your players' performances from 1 to 10, and that's of course with 10 being the best. Now, I say this every week, but the reason I want you guys to do this is so that you guys can get involved in the podcast, you guys can share your views of the game, and it's just so I can read through it and compare how we thought each of the players performed, and of course have a discussion based upon that, because certainly it was a good performance at the weekend against Liverpool, and you know, some players are going to get more praise than others. So of course feel free to share your player ratings just so we can compare, you know, how we thought players performed. And of course, if we do disagree, of course we can have a discussion based upon that. And even if you don't want to do that, or you're a Liverpool fan and you find yourself on the podcast, comment below with your general views of the game, because obviously a Palace perspective, yes, it was disappointing that our goal got disallowed and the fact that we conceded 2 goals, but the fact that we scored against Liverpool, who have got such a solid defence this season, we've being able to play as well as we did against them for the amount of time we did, you know, you've got to give us a bit of praise for that. And then likewise for Liverpool, you know, they're just grinding out results, getting result after result, carrying on this unbeaten run. So for their perspective, you know, a win's a win, doesn't matter how they get it, and you know, they're well on their way to win the league. So of course 2 different perspectives here, but I think both sets of fans can be fairly happy, not obviously in the result. Obviously Liverpool will be happy in the result, but not us. But in terms of the performance of both teams, I think both sets of fans can be quite happy and come out of the game quite pleased in terms of how they perform. So like I said, if you are someone who wants to get involved, you know, feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section below, whether that be about players, whether that be about the game in general. And it's not just so I can read it, but also other fans who find themselves on the podcast, they can also read it, so that once again they can join in with a discussion rather than just listening to my opinion in the podcast. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned or join our Facebook group, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. So I'm now going to move on to my player rating, starting goal with Guaita, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of Guaita's performance, you know, aside from the 2 goals we conceded, I think it was a fairly solid performance from him. And to be honest, it's what we've come to expect from him this season. So it's no surprise when he actually puts in a really good performance. But the thing that I liked about his performance, and you know, a moment that I picked out, or moments I picked out, was actually early on in the game where, you know, Liverpool came out all guns blazing, you know, having a few chances here and there. And actually Guaita was the one who actually came off his line really quickly, swept up that danger, and made sure that Liverpool couldn't sort of let that sort of, I suppose, the momentum on starting the game actually take effect. And that's why actually in that first half we had loads of chances in comparison to recent games, is because we were able to actually battle up against Liverpool, because we weren't under so much pressure. And that's not to say Liverpool were bad, it's just the fact that we were actually playing much better than we have done against other top 6 teams this season. So I don't know whether it's because Liverpool were off their game, even though they played well, or whether it's just the fact that we just upped our game against top 6 opposition. Whatever it was, we had a lot more chances, and you could say it all came down to Guaita in terms of he was the guy making sure that Liverpool couldn't build up any sort of momentum. Any momentum they did have, he killed it straight away, and that was all down to him actually being alert, quick off his line, sweeping up that danger. And just for the rest of the match, you know, going into the second half, just having that authority in the back four, having that control, making sure everyone's in the right position, and just making sure we keep that defensive shape and the way we play defensively, like that's been, you know, so successful for us in the last season or so. So the fact that we had Guaita at the back being solid from the start, and then carrying on, making sure everyone was in the right positions, and like I said, aside from the goals, not actually putting a foot wrong. You know, I think we've got to give him a little bit of credit here. Now, obviously, in terms of Mané's goal, we're not going to talk too much about that, but in terms of a shot that Mané had later on in the game, fantastic save from Guaita, you know, right on the centre of goal. Mané's looking to get it into sort of the bottom, his bottom left corner, so the bottom right corner, and of course Guaita makes a fantastic, you know, diving save, strong enough just to flick it in behind, and obviously goes out for a corner. Whereas obviously the goal we conceded from Mané, obviously Guaita got a hand to it, wasn't enough, went in or hit one post, hit the other post, and then Van Aanholt wasn't able to clear it, albeit I think it was already over the line when Van Aanholt got there. But like I've said, aside from the 2 goals we conceded, obviously not much you could do about that first one, because he got a hand to it, but it came off both posts, then went in. And obviously the second one, we should be doing a lot better defensively, even though Jeffrey Slut was pushed in the back by, I think it was Van Dijk or whoever it was. Even though that obviously restricted Slut from obviously clearing the ball, there were still 3 or 4 other defenders in front of the goal line who should have done better. So realistically, I've given Guaita a 7 because he obviously started the game really well by being quick off his line, being alert, doing what he has to do. He obviously made that one save in particular from Mané, which I was impressed with. And like I've said, I can't really blame him for the goal. So I do think overall, the 7 I've given him is a fair result. So now I'm going to move on to the first player in our back 4, and that is the right back Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of Ward's performance, you know, there isn't too much to talk about other than the fact that he came back from injury, put in a fairly solid shift, but then also had to leave the pitch later on with an injury as well. And, you know, I think that might be a reoccurrence of his previous injury, because of course before the game there was lots of speculation. Would he start? Would we actually have a proper right back for the game? And of course it ended up actually Ward playing, but then unluckily for us he ended up getting injured again. We don't know, you know, how serious that is. We don't know how long he would be out for if it is serious, but you know, nevertheless, the time he was on the pitch, I've given him 6 because he put in a solid display, done what he had to do up against Liverpool, and we know how lethal their front 3 can be. So you've got someone like Joe Ward, isn't the quickest player, but the fact that he put in a solid display, done what he had to do up against them defensively, and even though he done a good job up against them, it was mainly down to the fact that it was only a few moments that he had to deal with Liverpool players, because he was sort of left relatively untroubled for quite a lot of the time he was on the pitch. So once again, that's all down to Liverpool not necessarily playing at their 100% that they normally do, but we sort of capitalised on that, and it obviously meant that people like Joe Ward had a decent game when they had to be called upon, but for quite a lot of the game, considering how good Liverpool's attack can be, he was left untroubled because they weren't necessarily at their best. And like I've said, even obviously he went off with injury, but before that, done really well in terms of not being troubled, putting in a solid display, and that's something which I really like to see. And it was obviously disappointing, you know, you've got a player just come back from injury, he obviously gets injured again, has to go off. Like I've said, hopefully it isn't too serious, but if it is, even if it's not too serious but he's still going to be out for a few weeks or so, we need to obviously make sure that our team can cope with the fact that we've only got one first team right back, let's say. Obviously we know Kelly can play there, but we obviously, you know, we've got to be really cautious, you know, with Joe Ward at the minute until January, until we can actually get in another right back. But like I said here, fully deserving of the 6 I've given him, you know, up against the quality that Liverpool have, the fact that he put in a solid display, and the fact that the rest of the team sort of helped him in the fact that he was untroubled because people in the midfield were restricting Liverpool, were making it difficult for them. So the fact that we had other players on the pitch doing a lot of work, which, you know, reflected on other players in the team because they were under a lot less pressure, was of course really good to see as well. So once again here, Joe Ward, hopefully the injury isn't too serious, but I've given him a 6 for the weekend. So now moving on to the first centre back, and that is James Tompkins, who I am going to give a 6 overall. In terms of one moment in particular that really stuck out for me was obviously one of the blocks he made in the game. Obviously denied Sadio Mané about 10 minutes into the game, and that could have been a game-changing moment because you score a goal early on, you know, first 10 minutes or so, and it could be a bloodbath. We know what Liverpool are like. They could have scored 2, 3, maybe even 4 goals. But the fact that, you know, what looked to be a certain goal, you look back at the replays, he was almost going to score Mané, and the fact that Tompkins made that great block, that is something for me which really stands out and just shows the contribution he made in the game. Because like I said, if we had conceded that, it would have been a different story there. And, you know, like I said, I can't be any clearer. It looked like a certain goal. So once again, Tompkins making himself count, putting in these fantastic blocks, last-ditch challenges, which of course was great to see. Now, in terms of his first half display, I think that was absolutely stellar in terms of defensively and also offensively, because of course, yes, he done really good defensive work. He stopped Mané and just marshalled the defence generally really well. But obviously we had a set piece, obviously the corner's being whipped in. I think it was Wijnaldum, obviously flicked it on the Milivojevic's corner, obviously flicked it on right to Tompkins. Tompkins has headed it in, and to be honest, he would have deserved that goal because his first half performance defensively was good. So actually getting a goal to show for it, or to show for his offensive work, but to show for his overall effort in the game, would have been really, really well deserved. And of course it was disallowed for VAR. Obviously there's lots of debate around this. At the end of the day, I, in previous seasons, have moaned about players getting pushed in the box and penalties being given or penalties not being given. And you know, you've got to put your hands up and go, yes, it's a bit strict, I suppose, or a bit soft in the fact that are you pushing over the player? Didn't actually have any effect on the goal because of course he wasn't the player who was actually defending Tompkins, but then likewise you shouldn't really be pushing players in the box to the ground anyway. So I suppose in that aspect, obviously it's fair enough it was ruled out by VAR, but then of course it's very, very tough on us, the fact that we thought we scored right before half time, great time to score, and it gets disallowed. But then also you've got someone like Virgil van Dijk pushing Jeffrey Slupp. I think it was Van Dijk pushing Jeffrey Slupp for Liverpool's second goal as well, pushing him down, which obviously stopped him from clearing the ball. So that was a more obvious thing there, where you've actually pushed down the player who could actually stop that goal from going in. Whereas with our goal, you know, Jordan Ayew didn't actually push anyone who could have had any effect or any possible way to actually stop Tompkins from scoring. So in that aspect, it was quite unlucky that it was obviously disallowed by VAR, but then likewise it shows the inconsistency in the fact that if you're going to disallow one goal for someone getting pushed in the back, which is fair enough, but didn't actually have any impact on the goal which was scored, you've also got to look at it and go, actually when someone pushes someone and it directly results in it, even though there was 4 other players in the box as well, right in front of the goal line, even though that was the case, you've got to look at that and go, consistency. If you're going to disallow one goal for a push in the back, you've also got to disallow the other one. But like I've said, I think you've got to look at Tompkins' performance and go, you know, aside from the fact that that goal got disallowed, his performance was good and fully deserving of the 6 I've given him. Now, in terms of Mané's first goal, obviously I talked about Guaita getting a hand to it and it goes off both posts. You know, you could argue that maybe Tompkins could have done a little bit better in terms of he had a chance to clear the ball, didn't quite clear the ball before it reached Mané, and of course Liverpool scored their first goal from that. Obviously, we saw early on in the first half where of course he made that fantastic block on Mané to obviously stop him getting through clean on goal, which would have been a certain goal. So it would have been a little bit nicer for him. You know, he had the chance to clear the ball, just get the danger. Whether it goes out for, it goes, you know, back to Liverpool keeper or goes out for a throw-in, just clear the danger, get rid of it. But of course, he didn't take that chance to clear the ball, and of course, it reached Mané and he scored from that. So I'm not really going to criticise him too much for that because, of course, you know, it came off both posts. Guaita got a slight hand to it, and of course, there's other things you could talk about as well in terms of the build-up to it, but you know, I think it's worth mentioning that maybe Tompkins could have done slightly better, because if we hadn't conceded that goal, or if he wasn't the player who was near enough to clear it, he probably would have got a 7 for the game overall, because that first half display combined with, you know, the fact that he almost got the goal for us, unluckily disallowed, you know, that would have all sort of come together and would have been a really, really good performance from him. But I do think overall the 6 is a fair result. Obviously, comment below with your thoughts on VAR. Personally, for me, I think, yes, that's fair enough. Put your hands up. Yes, that's rightly disallowed, but then you've also got to disallow their second goal because of course the push on back on Jeffrey Slupp. So of course I'll leave that for you guys to comment and debate in the comment section below. So I'm now going to move on to the second centre back, and that is Gary Cahill, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now this was sort of an uncharacteristic performance, I suppose you could say, from Gary Cahill, in the fact that he's always given 6s and 7s, even 8s out of 10s. He's been very professional since he's been at Palace, but this was just sort of an off game in the fact that he wasn't quite as good as he has been in previous games. Not to say he was absolutely terrible and was the reason we lost the game, because it was a tight game in terms of both teams playing well. It was just the fact that he wasn't quite as good as he's been recently. Now, in the first half, he actually had a decent chance himself from a set piece to obviously score, and obviously headed it just over. So once again, you know, we had Tompkins actually score a goal, getting disallowed. We have Cahill with a good chance, obviously, to get Palace ahead, and of course headed it over. You know, you maybe think about positioning next time, or think about something else, just to obviously make sure that when you get into these good positions, you can actually finish the chances, because games against top 6 teams, they're always going to be tight, and once the opposition get that first goal, it's going to be difficult for you to get back into the game. So any chances you can get, you need to finish them, and I suppose that's sort of the thing with Gary Cahill's chance, in the fact that early on in the game, in that first half, could have, you know, could have given us the lead, but obviously unluckily for us it didn't. But actually, aside from that, generally I think he was as solid as ever. But you know, in terms of Liverpool's winner, he was one of the players involved in that sort of pack of four who were just in front of the goal line. Awful attempts, obviously, from the whole team in terms of attempting to clear the ball. But obviously, Cahill being the experienced player in a defence, being that guy with the knowledge he's got of the game, with the skill, the technical ability, he should be the guy there making sure that he can put in that challenge or put in that clearance, just do what he has to do to get the ball away. Whereas it just looked like all players were scrambling around. Whereas what he should have done is just taken the initiative, either to sort of dive on the ball to flick it away or block it or just clear it. And you know, because the whole team's awful attempts to clear it, but obviously Cahill as well being that main guy at the back, you know, that sort of failure to clear the ball obviously ultimately ended with us conceding that goal late in the game. But like I've said, you know, other than that, and other than that decent chance he had to obviously score but it went over, other than that, a fairly decent game, fairly solid, but of course not as good as he has been previously. So I do think overall for Gary Cahill, I think the 5 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our back four, and that is the left back Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 4 overall. Now, in terms of Van Aanholt's performance, obviously the majority of people were obviously disappointed with him and may think obviously a 4 doesn't quite go deep enough, isn't quite harsh enough. But then likewise, people may go, actually, maybe a 4 is a fair thing, because whilst there were some parts of his game which were very, very questionable, there were other parts of his game, particularly early on, that were quite positive. But I do think, on the reflection, I do think the 4 is a fair reflection, considering obviously the performance of the rest of the team, but also, you know, what he did do in the game, or what he could have done better. Obviously there were quite glaring things that really are quite basic things that a defender should be doing. Now, in terms of the positives, might as well start there. I think early on in the game, obviously Palace were obviously playing quite well early on, but him in particular, running up and down that left flank, putting a lot of pressure on Trent Alexander-Arnold in terms of running at him, looking to put crosses in, and obviously ultimately one of them actually led to him earning a corner for Palace, obviously putting pressure on him, causing you know, the ball to go out for a corner, and that was really, really good to see. It was nice to see that high tempo early on in the game, and I suppose looking at the rest of the team's performance, that sort of set the tone for the first half, that first period of the game, in the fact that we were up for the game, we were putting pressure on Liverpool, something which they probably didn't expect. They would have expected us to sit back and just park the bus. So the fact that we actually went at them maybe surprised them, but maybe just meant that obviously they had to sort of change their game plan, and that obviously led to us playing a lot better than we have done against previously, obviously in the games recently against the top 6 teams. Now, in terms of that part of his game, that was great. It was nice to see him going that far up the pitch, putting a lot of pressure on the opposition. But obviously the reason I've given him a 4 is because of how disappointing his defensive work was. Because whilst his offensive work was 6, 7 out of 10 in terms of putting pressure on the back four of Liverpool, his defensive work was sort of a 3 or even a 2 because of just how, sort of, I suppose, just the simple errors and mistakes he was making. And you know, you've got to look at his positioning a number of times throughout the game. Obviously it wasn't great for the majority of the time, but there were loads of times where just these moments you're completely out of position, you're just wandering out of the defence, you're not in the right position, you're not aware of what's going on around you. And that was the thing that was really, really sort of annoying for me, in the fact that that's just a simple thing you need to do. You need to make sure you're in the right position. And it wasn't like he was sort of drifting around and he was sort of going into different positions down that left flank. It was just the fact that there were loads of times where he was completely out of position. It wasn't like he was a few yards here or there, which allows players to do 1-2s or get around him. It was literally completely out of position, and that was a number of times, and that was the thing that was really disappointing for me, because that's sort of your basic defensive work. You need to know where you have to be, and even if you're doing this sort of zonal positioning thing where you're not got set position but you move around, you've at least got to make sure you are aware of what's happening in the game so you can adapt to that. Whereas this one, completely out of position for the most part, and I hope I've explained that quite simply, but that's really my thoughts of that. And you know, you've got to look back at Roberto Firmino's goal and go, you know, Van Aanholt clearly one of the players at fault for that, in terms of he had an opportunity to clear the ball way before the goal was scored and didn't. And that's the thing that's disappointing, because it's the fine margins like that, by not being in position, not making the clearance, which ultimately lead to things like goals, or set pieces being given away which lead to goals, or corners being given away. It's little mistakes like that which ultimately punish us. And it wasn't the fact that we were playing particularly badly as a team. It's just one mistake from Van Aanholt, not being in the right position, not making that clearance for Firmino's goal. Little things like that was the thing that was really disappointing, and that's why I've given him the 4 overall, because for all that good work at the beginning of the game, that was completely thrown out the window by the fact that he didn't clear the ball when he had to, the fact that he was just wandering around the defence, not being in the right position, and being way out of position way too many times as well. So for that reason, I've given him the 4. Obviously, comment below with your thoughts. I know there's going to be a bit of debate as to whether maybe a 4's too harsh, maybe it's not harsh enough, and I'll leave that for you guys to debate in the comment section below. But I do think, on reflection, playing at left back throughout the game, I do think that Patrick Van Aanholt deserves the 4 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our midfield, and that is Cheikhou Kouyaté, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. So in terms of Kouyaté's performance, there isn't really too much I can say in terms of moments in the game where I thought, you're making yourself count here, you've made a real impact here. But I just think, on the most part, in terms of containing Liverpool, just being up for that midfield battle, I think he done really well down the centre of the pitch. Now, the thing that I was most impressed with is just his ability to actually carry the ball forward, and of course that's something I've seen from him a lot this season. But this game in particular, the way you're going to beat Liverpool, the way you're going to get the better of Liverpool, is obviously by carrying the ball and breaking down the midfield, breaking down the defence. So once again, we had someone like Kouyaté actually using his physicality, using his ability to drive forward by actually carrying the ball forward and actually driving down the middle. And it was a really good battle in the centre of the park in terms of Liverpool's midfield and Palace's midfield. But I think, Kouyaté in particular, up against that, obviously I wouldn't say give us the upper foot, but obviously gave us a little bit more of an advantage compared to when we've played against Chelsea recently, when we played against Leicester, just because of how well he was carrying the ball forward. Just allowed us to break through the Liverpool midfield far easier than we had done against Leicester, we had done against Chelsea, like other teams have done against Liverpool this season. So the fact that we had someone like Kouyaté using that physicality, using that power to carry the ball forward, was something which was really impressive for me. Now, of course, towards the end of the game, obviously Virgil van Dijk, obviously there's nothing malicious in this, but of course he was a little bit quieter after they sort of had a coming together. Both went for a header, landed, and obviously Virgil van Dijk stood in his foot. Obviously wasn't quite the same after that, but it's not a serious injury, and it's something he could just run off and he'd be fine the next game. But it's something to consider, because he obviously started the game really well, carrying the ball forward, having that real good battle in the midfield. And of course something like that, not a serious injury, but it's not nice having someone step on your foot, which of course, for me at least, looking back at the game, did sort of seem to impact him or restrict his influence sort of as the game went on. So once again here, Cheikhou Kouyaté, can't fault his effort, can't fault his energy, can't fault the physicality, because everything he done in terms of the midfield battle, in terms of combating up against that Liverpool midfield, I think he done a fairly decent job. And in terms of how we were able to go in at half-time 0-0. It was down to obviously the defence playing well, but also the midfield containing the pressure, frustrating Liverpool. And I think that's something, on the most part, these guys done well. So I'm now going to move on to the captain and our second player in the midfield, and that is Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, once again with Luka, there isn't really too much to say in terms of moments in the game, but I just think on the most part he was consistently good throughout the game, done what he had to do, and in terms of, once again, frustrating Liverpool, he done exactly that. Now, the thing that I would pick out from his performance is, of course, his deliveries from set pieces, and they've been questionable in recent weeks, but actually this game here he got it bang on, produced some fantastic deliveries from set pieces, and of course when obviously he was in defensive duties, when he was obviously being that anchor at the bottom of the midfield, he was also receiving the ball deep and also distributing that well from inside Palace's half as well. So not only was he in advanced positions, delivering the set piece as well, but actually when he was playing back, when he was deep in our half, he'd be able to receive the ball, be composed with it, and actually do good work with it. So the fact that, you've got to look at the Tompkins header, for example, that obviously the disallowed goal. Obviously, it didn't go directly to Tompkins, but the fact that he put in a delivery which forced Wijnaldum to flick it onto Tompkins, that's the sort of delivery we want week in, week out. We want a delivery which, if he's not going to go directly onto a head of a Palace player, or he's not going to go into a zone where someone can actually run clearly onto it and obviously header it in, you need it to put the defence under pressure so they make mistakes like they did there. So obviously we haven't seen it much this season in terms of his set pieces because they've been questionable, but it was nice to see him actually putting good set pieces here, because when you're playing against someone like Liverpool, you're not always going to beat them based on your skill. You're going to have to beat them by being quite clever and putting in good set pieces and putting them under that pressure, which are necessarily don't always get from teams. Was of course good to see. And in terms of just getting the ball from deep, we had someone like Kouyaté picking the ball up and running through, whereas he had someone like Luka not necessarily doing the complete opposite, but actually receiving the ball and doing good work with it in terms of his passing. So you had one person in the midfield driving forward and trying to break down Liverpool's midfield and back line, and then you've got someone who's actually distributing and doing really well, good things with the ball when it was deep. So once again here, Luka Milivojevic fully deserving of the 6 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the third player in our midfield, and that is James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. To be honest, what could I say about his performance other than the fact that he was a workhorse? You know, I think the 6 is a fair reflection of that, because once again, like the other 2 midfielders, there isn't too much to say about his performance in terms of any real moments or any real bits of quality. But the fact that he was disciplined, done what he had to do, you know, in terms of covering both defensive and offensive positions, the fact that he was getting involved in the midfield, just everything really about his game really epitomises that word workhorse, in terms of he done what he had to do for the team, was working hard, yes, with little reward in terms of no real moments of quality, but the fact that he just done the basics right, done what he had to do for the team, was the thing that really did impress me. And you know, I think the 6 is a fair reflection of that, because you know, that's what I've given quite a lot of the players. And I think as a midfield 3, obviously that's going to be our sort of default thing going forward, but I think they do complement each other really well. So you've got someone like Kouyaté and Luka, I suppose, who obviously play defensive, and you've got someone like McArthur who plays slightly further forward, but he also works really well with Kouyaté when he goes forward as well. So that midfield 3 seems to work really well. And in terms of obviously restricting Liverpool, we know how difficult teams have found that this season. The fact that we had someone like McArthur right in the centre of that, obviously making it difficult for Liverpool, but also being disciplined about it. We know he normally likes to put in a little challenge here, maybe get a booking here and there, but the fact that he was disciplined with the performance and just managed to keep that work rate as well was something which of course is really impressive for me. So I do think on the whole the 6 is a fair result for James McArthur. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our front 3, and that is Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of Townsend's performance, obviously over the last sort of few weeks or so, they've been a little bit disappointing. You know, I've talked about it on the podcast. I said I want a bit more from him. I expect a bit more from him. And whilst in some games he's been completely sort of anonymous, other games he's been looking to do good things, but nothing's come off. So this game was a complete sort of opposite to that, where he was looking to get involved. He was really involved in the game, because obviously he was looking to get into these positions, but also I think in terms of his quality, which has been missing in the last few games, that sort of came back into this game here. And I suppose the word you could use, and I've seen a lot of people use them, is determined and relentless, because that's exactly what we got from his performance. Because in recent weeks, obviously maybe it wasn't a lack of him trying, maybe it's just the fact that he was going through a bad spell of form, but things didn't quite seem to happen for him recently. So the fact that this performance here, he came out determined, he was relentless in terms of everything he was trying to do. He was trying to make sure that something could come off of that. When he was making runs, he was determined in terms of getting past that player, relentless in terms of at least trying to get the ball into the box from that run. So things about his performance and things about his game really sort of have improved in recent weeks, and that was really nice to see, because of course you'd expect, you know, against Leicester, against Chelsea, obviously hard oppositions, but then you've also got Liverpool on top of that, who are obviously a class above them 2 teams. So realistically, I think it'd be a game where he'd be quiet again, but the fact that he rose above it and was able to obviously cope with it better than he has done in previous games was obviously really good to see. And I suppose what you've got to look at, obviously in the Liverpool team, obviously in the back 4, the left back, Andrew Robinson, obviously he's just come back from an injury, and I suppose you could say that the reason Townsend played a lot better is just the fact that he was taking advantage of a weakened Robertson. Now, I'm not really going to read too much into it, I'm not really going to say that was the main reason, but certainly you've got to consider that, because of course Townsend's been relatively quiet in recent games, but then he comes up against someone who's obviously been really good this season, but has just come back from injury, so they're not going to be quite 100%. So whether it's the fact that he was just playing a lot better because he was up against him, or whether it's just the fact that he just upped his game because he knows that his last few weeks or so haven't been great, so he's just upped his performance, whatever it was really great to see, because there was a real difference in terms of his effort, his energy, his quality in the game, which was of course really good to see. Now, in terms of efforts from the game, you know, there isn't any real ones really for me to pick out, but I've got to say there were a few good efforts. So it's nice to see him actually obviously come back into the game and actually play better, but also, you know, get chances as well as that, because it's all right playing well but not getting chances to show for it, whereas this game here he improved both aspects of that, which of course was really good to see. Now obviously a few good efforts, you know, they were from range, so once again trying his luck from distance. Obviously none of them came to anything, but it's nice to see him actually getting into these positions, in the first place. If he's actually getting into good shooting positions, he might as well try, because we've seen him do it before. And I suppose there was one sort of towards the end that maybe he could have taken. So I suppose I'll leave that for you guys to debate. But I think, overall, I think he fully deserves the 7 I've given him. A very, very good performance, where he worked hard for the team. Complete parallel to his performances in recent weeks. And that's the thing really for me that impressed me most. Not because of his effort, not because of how relentless he was in terms of chasing things down, getting balls into the box. Not because of his quality in terms of having efforts, but just the fact that he completely turned around his performances from recent weeks, which of course was really nice to see, because you've got to say, when you've got a player going through bad form, they can let that continue and let that get them down. But it was nice to see him actually put that bad form behind him, or I wouldn't say bad form, but average form behind him, and actually come back into a game playing relatively well. So once again here, Andros Townsend fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the second player, and that is Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, the first thing to say is the fact that it was nice to see Zaha actually get off the mark for the season. So, of course, there have been games this season. I think, we've played 13 games now. Certainly the first sort of half or so of them games, you could say that, obviously with the speculation over the summer about his transfer and things not happening, he was obviously quite average, and it seemed that was playing on his mind. Whereas the last few games or so, and certainly the second half of that 13 games, he's played a lot better, albeit he's had nothing to show for it. So it was nice to see him actually, get to that next stage. So the first stage, putting the transfer stuff behind him, obviously recent games. The second stage, obviously playing well but nothing to show for it, and then now we're into that first stage. Hopefully the third stage he kicks off for the season, starts getting more goals, getting more assists, because certainly we've seen it with lots of other players. Once they get that first goal, that can be sort of a domino effect, and then they can carry on and continue their good form throughout the rest of the season. But of course, like I've said, really nice to see him actually get back off the mark, get back into the gist of scoring, and certainly it was a good goal at that. Now, in terms of his overall performance, I've given him a 7, obviously because of the goal, as I've mentioned, but also just because of how lively and how consistent he was in terms of causing problems for the Liverpool back line. Because, of course, we know he can be lively, and we saw it in this game here in terms of having the energy, looking to use his pace to obviously carry the ball forward. So we saw that in the game, but the fact that he was doing it so constantly, the fact that he was consistently doing it whenever he got the ball, the fact that he was constantly, running at them whenever he had the opportunity. So the fact that he combined that energy, that pace, by doing it whenever he could, rather than doing it, okay, maybe one time out of 10, he actually try and to obviously attack Liverpool's backline and cause them problems every time he got the ball was of course good to see. And obviously one player in particular who obviously had I wouldn't say a torrid time against him, but certainly a lot harder time against him than other players have had this season, and that was of course Alexander-Arnold, because I think just because of his pace, how lively he was, the trickery he was showing, that just that energy and that commitment Zaha was showing in the game, that obviously was reflected in Alexander-Arnold's performance, in the fact that he was obviously struggling to deal with him, and we certainly saw that with the goal we scored, and that was just down to Zaha just getting the better of him. Maybe you could say Alexander-Arnold had a bad day, but I think it's just down to the way Zaha played up against him just made life even more difficult for him. Now, in terms of games recently, obviously Zaha hasn't necessarily been playing that great, but that's because other players in the team and just the way we've approached games so negatively obviously meant that our attack was neglected. Whereas in this game here, because of our more positive approach to the game, obviously meant that Zaha was able to engage into the game more, and obviously the players were able to engage him more into the game as well. And that was obviously good for him, but also good for the team, because whilst it's good for him in terms of getting chances and actually having more opportunity on the ball, in terms of the team, it just allows us to work better together and allows us to actually, find these passes to Zaha, actually get into positions inside the box where Zaha can go out wide and cross the ball in. So the fact that both the player and the team are working a lot more better, engaging a lot better than we have done in recent weeks, and that's all down to the way we approach the game, because we made that little tweak or whatever it was in the mentality in terms of, yes, we've got to be defensive, but rather than doing what we did against Chelsea, against Leicester and just sitting back, if we actually have a go and at least try and do something up against Liverpool, we could get something from the game. And ultimately we didn't in terms of a result, but in terms of the performance and in terms of Zaha just getting more engaged into the game was of course great to see, and he did look better for it, because obviously whilst the team played better in terms of just getting the ball to him, that's how he thrives, and we certainly saw that in the game here. Now of course in terms of the goal, obviously we could talk about Benteke's run, which I will do shortly. But in terms of, you know, Zaha's contribution, winning the ball back, running as far as he did, in terms of, you know, finding that small pocket of space, exploiting that, and then obviously making that run, pass it to Benteke, and then once again making that diagonal run to get inside the box, to get on the end of Townsend's pass, to, of course, where he obviously done a little bit of trickery, and then of course rifled it into the bottom corner. So obviously that sort of goal was fully deserved, in terms of he played well throughout the whole game, so it's nice to see him actually have something to show for that good performance, because of course whilst he had loads of other chances, and he had a chance of even later on in the game to make it 2-2, but you know, obviously throughout the game he had really good attacking chances, but it was nice to see the goal. He had something to show for his good attacking work, because that goal in particular, in terms of running up against the back four and then passing the ball to Benteke, running back in and getting in between the defence to then get on the end of another pass to obviously score, was really great to see. And you know, going back to Alexander-Arnold and Zaha causing him problems, you've just got to look back at the goal and think that actually Benteke obviously caused problems for Alexander-Arnold in terms of getting past him so easily, and of course Zaha in the first place getting past him and then running into the box. So in terms of the Liverpool back line, you know, we just sort of, even though the majority of the game they were fairly solid, that sort of moment, that goal, we sort of cut them in half in terms of getting the ball past Alexander-Arnold, getting the ball to Andros, and of course Zaha in between two players gets through and rifles it into the bottom corner. So overall, I do think this 7 is a fair result for Zaha's performance, you know, in terms of how lively he was, the fact that he was constantly a threat to the opposition, and the fact that he caused, you know, Alexander-Arnold in particular lots of problems, was of course good to see. It was nice to see actually Zaha wasn't afraid to go up against players. And whilst that's obviously down to him and his upturn of form in this game here, but it's also down to the team playing a lot more better, because we were playing more positive. We had to actually have the opportunity to get people like Zaha more involved in the game, and that was of course great to see. And in terms of the goal, like I said, I can't highlight it enough. Goal of the game in terms of that run from Zaha and Benteke, and also the finish as well. So once again here, Wilfried Zaha finally getting the goal he obviously has craved this season, and hopefully it is the first of many more to come this season. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our starting 11, and that is Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. In terms of Ayew's performance, obviously whilst, you know, Townsend and Zaha had really good offensive games, I've given him 7s out of 10s. I think Ayew sort of had the complete opposite, where yes, he obviously had opportunities early on to obviously get involved in the game and have chances to score, because he didn't take them, and just because our sort of focus seemed to be more about people like Zaha and Townsend taking that attack forward and actually exploiting the fullbacks that Liverpool had, rather than actually having people like Jordan Ayew trying to go up against Virgil van Dijk, which of course was always going to be something which he was going to lose, because of course Ayew isn't the tallest player. So because the way we were playing was a little bit more centred around the wingers as opposed to the striker, obviously meant that Ayew couldn't quite get involved as much as he would have liked to, and that seemed to just affect his performance, in the fact that he didn't quite get the chances he would have liked, and of course subsequently got substituted in the second half. Now obviously early on there was a chance, he obviously missed a perfect opportunity to obviously give us the lead, and that would have been perfect for us, scoring in that first half. And obviously we knew we went in at 0-0 at half time, so maybe going in, if he scores that, we go in at 1-0 up at half time, and maybe it would have been a different story. And you know, yes, it was promising to obviously see him to get into these forward positions, and you know, being able to actually, you know, go up against people like Virgil van Dijk. But because of just how good people like Van Dijk are, you know, it just obviously made life difficult for him. And you know, go back to that point about us being more focused on the wingers, because people like Zaha and obviously people like Townsend were the main focal points of our attacks, that obviously meant that he suffered. So, you know, that was a little bit disappointing to see. But on the plus side, I suppose it's nice to see him actually get a few opportunities like we saw early on in the game. But for the most part, I think the 5 is a fair result, just given the fact that he wasn't really getting into the good positions. Obviously cost us the goal in terms of, you know, we could have actually got something from the game if he had scored that chance. But then on the most part, because of obviously who he was up against defensively and our approach to the game, obviously meant that he couldn't quite have the attacking contribution that he would have liked from the game. And normally we see him chasing down defenders, we normally see him getting really involved and coming deep. We didn't actually see that in this game here as well. So up against the quality of the opposition, as well as not doing what he normally does in terms of that energy, in terms of that chasing, was obviously a little bit disappointing, and I think one of the reasons why he didn't have that much of a great performance. So I do think overall for Jordan Ayew, a 5 is a fair result. Now in terms of the substitutes we made in the game, obviously Martin Kelly came on for the injured Joe Ward, obviously Jeffrey Slupp came on, and Benteke came on after that as well. Now in terms of Martin Kelly, I'm going to give him a 6 overall, because I think even though he hasn't played much at right back in recent years, he slotted in there, coming on for Joe Ward, and actually got forward really well in terms of, we know he's not that great going forward, but he got into forward positions, much like Vanana on the other side, and, you know, for the short amount of time he was on the pitch, the fact that he was being positive in an offensive sense was great to see as well, because he got that mix right between doing that defensive work, doing the offensive work, and that was really good to see, actually someone coming off the bench, filling in a defensive role, and also just allowing, you know, obviously he allowed us to go slightly further up the pitch, and, you know, I do think for that the 6 is a fair result. In terms of Jeffrey Slupp, I'm also going to give him a 6, because obviously I think in terms of the energy and the fresh legs he brings to the team, that was of course good to see. But obviously there was a decent shot on goal, literally minutes after he came on, which if that had gone in, it would have been an instant impact for him, and obviously the game could have been different in terms of us scoring a goal. But it's nice to see us actually having players who are coming off the bench and actually having that instant impact. So it was nice to see actually Jeffrey Slupp have that chance, you know, literally straight off the bench, which of course is good to see, and that's why I've given him a 6 overall. And in terms of Benteke, I'm going to give him a 7, because I was really impressed with him. You know, I talked quite negatively about Ayew in terms of he didn't do what he normally does do, and obviously just our approach to the game obviously meant that he didn't play well, whereas Benteke came on and it was as if like we were playing a different system, or it was completely like we actually didn't have Ayew on the pitch in the first place, because as soon as we brought Benteke on, we sort of changed the whole way we were playing. And, you know, you've got to look at the one chance Benteke had, or one of the chances, you know, the ball just came into the box and he done an acrobatic bicycle kick. Yes, it went just wide, but that's sort of the impact, that's sort of the, I suppose, the confidence thing. You want someone to actually have the confidence to at least try taking that shot on, and the fact that he tried it, it was obviously great to see, and obviously it didn't go in, but the fact that he actually had that intent there to obviously try and at least score a chance, whereas Ayew didn't look like, for me at least, he didn't look like he was trying to create something out of nothing, was a little bit disappointing to see. So the fact that we have Benteke coming off the bench, actually trying things like that and looking to cause problems for Liverpool, which Ayew couldn't quite do in the game, was of course really great to see. And, you know, in terms of Zaha's goal, like I've already said, you know, a pre-assist as I like to call it, because obviously Benteke was the guy who passed to Townsend, who passed to Zaha. And, you know, you've got to look at that chance. And obviously, yes, Zaha initially started it, but he offloaded the ball to Benteke. He created that opportunity with very composed play in terms of dribbling up the field, carrying the ball forward, then obviously making that, getting into the box, and then obviously passing the ball to Andros. So in terms of Benteke, fantastic impact off the bench in terms of that chance he had, which went just wide, and obviously the goal we scored in terms of carrying the ball so far forward, having that composed play inside the box, and of course, you know, eventually we went on to finish that chance. So I do think on the whole, I think it's very rarely that I actually give substitutes ratings, because they come on quite late in the game, they don't really have an impact. So the fact that all 3 substitutions here had an impact somehow in the game is of course something really positive to see from the game. Now, in terms of just a small summary of the game, not really going to dwell too much on it, but in terms of VAR, I've got to say, you know, hands up. Yes, it was a bit tough and a bit tough to take in terms of our goal getting disallowed, but, you know, fair enough, there's a push in the box, you're going to disallow that, even though the player's not directly involved in the goal that was scored. But then you've also got to disallow Liverpool's second one, because that's consistency, you know, players getting pushed in the back, and therefore he can't clear the ball, which obviously Liverpool therefore go and score from. And, you know, I think that, you know, VAR aside, talking about the performance, even though the result wasn't what, you know, obviously we knew we weren't going to win anyway. Well, I personally didn't come into the game thinking we were going to get anything. So the fact that we even came close to getting anything from the game in terms of how positive we were playing, the fact that we had loads of chances, the fact that we weren't just parking the bus, the fact that we just had a slightly different sort of insight into the game or approach to the game than we had done against Chelsea, we had done against Leicester, the fact that we were so much more positive, and it was arguably one of our best performances this season. You know, it just begs the question, if we just put that much effort and played as well as we did in terms of creating chances, in terms of defending for the most part, aside from the goals, if we'd just done that a few weeks ago, we would have had a few more points, because against Leicester, if we just taken our chances, if we just attacked them rather than sitting deep, something else different could have happened. And I suppose you could say the same once again here about this performance. But what you've got to look at now is that we've now got these difficult games behind us. Obviously the Liverpools, your Leicesters, your Chelseas, your Arsenals and your Man City. So we've got these games out of the way. We've got Burnley coming up at the weekend, and then obviously, you know, in terms of Burnley and all the games after that, it's a nice run of games going into Christmas, and this is where we really need to pick up our points now, because we've had these difficult games, put them behind us, and now we've got these, I wouldn't say easy games, but certainly easier games than the games we obviously have had in the recent weeks. So certainly a good performance here against Liverpool. Not really what I expected. I expected us to sit back, get sort of your default 2-3-0 loss against Liverpool. But the fact that we were able to bring the game to them, we played as well as we did, had chances to go ahead and still got a goal in the game. Even though we lost the game, still had a goal. A really good goal was of course real positive to see. So hopefully we can play as well as we did here, minus the defensive mistakes up against Burnley at the weekend. So I'm now going to move on to my man of the match award. But before I do that and give you my man of the match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now when you consider how good our performance was, obviously in comparison firstly to the games we played recently against the top 6 teams, but also just in terms of generally, in terms of just the players up in their performance to go up against, the top of the team at the top of the table, and the fact that it was only 1 goal in it, and of course obviously the debate about VAR, the fact that the team performed as well as we did, even though it's disappointing to lose the game in the way we did in terms of the defensive errors, but you've got to give credit to the majority of the team, because realistically, everyone sort of gave their all in the team, and that's why we had such a good improved performance in comparison to our games recently against sort of top 6 opposition, because we upped our game, because we just didn't sit back and defensively and actually go at the opposition. That's why our performance was so good, and obviously that reflects in the man of the match award, because there was loads of players I could really nominate, and that's all down to all of the players sort of in the team working together, up in their game. And I just don't understand why we don't do this every game, because if we perform like this every game, particularly against the top 6 teams, then obviously we're going to get a lot more positive results. So of course that was great to see, and it was difficult for me to narrow it down to 4 players, only because of just how good the team was as a whole. Now in terms of the players I've gone with Frashenta Guaita, James Tompkins, Andros Townsend and Wilfried Zaha. So a nice mix there between defence and attack. And in terms of Guaita, in terms of the goals, he couldn't do much about them, so putting them aside, I think he was very quick off his line early on in the game to maintain that control and make sure we didn't concede any goals early on. And the fact that for the rest of the game he showed his authority, showed his experience by just commanding the back line, making saves when he had to. One from Sadio Mané in particular really did impress me. So the fact that he was making himself count by showing his authority, getting off his line really quickly, and just doing what he had to do to ensure that we could restrict Liverpool was of course great to see. Albeit in the end, Liverpool did score 2 goals, and he obviously got a hand to one of those. Aside from the goals, a really good solid performance from him in the net. Obviously James Tompkins, 1 block in particular, for that alone he deserves to be on here, but that was obviously 10 minutes gone or thereabouts on the clock. Sadio Mane's gone through on goal, and of course almost certain to score, and Tompkins made that save. He made that tackle to obviously stop the ball going in, and that was of course great to see, because for sure that would have been a clear-cut chance, certain goal for Sadio Mane, and of course Tompkins sort of saved the blushes by obviously making sure he can make the block there. So for that alone he deserves to be there, but in terms of just his overall defensive work, it was absolutely stellar. Done what he had to do defensively, restricted Liverpool, which isn't something that any team has found really easy this season, but he'd done it, and done it quite effectively. And like I've said, he scored the goal, albeit it was disallowed for VAR, but nice to see him actually have that impact both defensively but offensively as well by getting on the end of set pieces. In terms of Andros Townsend, complete turnaround of his performances of late, which is really, really great to see. Positive performance from him, very determined, relentlessly trying to sort of run up against the opposition, trying to put balls into the box. So for just that effort and just that change of attitude and approach to the game from how he's played recently is why I've put him forward here. And whether that's because he was taking advantage of Robertson because he's just come back from injury, or whether it's just the fact that he's seen his games recently haven't been that good and he's just upped his game, whatever it was, it's really great to see such a positive performance from him. And that wasn't just in terms of just the effort, but in terms of the quality that came with it as well. And in terms of the final player, Wilfried Zaha, what can I say? Lively performance from him, consistently, causing Alexander-Arnold problems, as well as the rest of the Liverpool back line. Obviously, our approach to the game meant he was more involved, but even if that wasn't the case, I think just the way we approached this game just allowed him to obviously carry the ball forward more, attack the back line, and the fact that you just look at the goal we scored, obviously the good work came from Benteke as well in terms of running the channel down that left hand side and getting the ball into the box. But the fact that Zaha initially made the run, then made the run to get inside the box and exploit that space left behind to score his first goal of the season was of course great to see. Crucial moment as it was, because you're going in the final few minutes or so it was nice to see us score to make it 1-1. Ultimately we obviously conceded anyway and lost 2-1, but it was nice to see actually the build up to that goal, the quality of the goal, and the fact that just how efficient he was in terms of cutting inside and obviously getting through on goals. So overall, I do think, Wilfried Zaha deserves to be nominated for that. And, when you score the only goal of the game for your team, you're obviously going to be in there anyway. So really good. 4 I've listed here. Arguably I could have put many more players from our starting 11 and certainly from the bench as well, because of just the whole team performance was really good. But for me, I think it's an obvious choice. When you play as well offensively as you do, and then you also get the goal to show for that effort, it's really obvious who's going to win it. So I'm going to give it to Wilfried Zaha. So congratulations, Wilf. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you just do certainly get my sincere congratulations on what was yet another solid performance in you. And obviously, like I said, the reason I've given it to him as opposed to the other players I've listed, and certainly other players in the team, it's just down to the fact that he got the goal to show for his effort in the game, because he worked hard, had loads of energy, loads of pace, loads of skill, which was obviously good to see. And the fact that he got the goal to show for it is obviously why he's won this week's Man of the Match award. Obviously, feel free to comment below if you think I've missed anyone from the 4 I've nominated, and of course comment below with your overall Man of the Match. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my Man of the Match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha and Andros Townsend following the game.
Unfortunate defeat today, but is it fair to say it's a really good performance from the team?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, there's loads of positives to take from that game. We played against the best team in the league right now, to be honest. So I think we'll win more than we lose if we play like that. So I'm confident the boys will come back and hopefully we pick up points in the next couple of games.
Thought gone ahead in the first half through Tompkins' goal. What's the feeling in the dressing room about that decision to rule it out?
To be honest, I didn't really see what happened, really. It's only after it looked like a little bit of a nudge. But I feel like we got to just take it. It's unlucky we never got it today, and just be happy with the performance, and hopefully next game we can try and get all the points we can.
For your goal, it was a great move leading up to it, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, to be honest. It was. I think I ran with it, gave it to Chris gave it to Andros. And the reverse ball, I didn't even expect it myself. But yeah, it was a good move, and I'm happy I managed to score for the team today.
Does it feel like a relief for you to score?
Yeah, because I ain't scored in forever. So I'm glad to finally get on the score sheet, really. And hopefully there's more to come.
And how much are you looking forward to December? Quite a lot of games.
It's obviously going to be hard, but it's a chance to pick up points along the way. And I feel like with this performance, we'll win more than we lose. So looking forward to it.
Well, Andros, do you feel that really you deserve something today?
Yeah, of course. I think that's the best we've played this season. Out of possession, we didn't drop back. We didn't give them time on the ball. We pressed them high. We reduced them to a few chances I've ever seen Liverpool create. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, that's why they're fighting for the Premier League, because when they're not playing well, they still find a way to get the 3 points. And unfortunately for us, that was the case today.
The opening goal always makes a difference. You thought you had it and it went away. Have you had a chance to look at it again?
I've not had a chance, but I'm being told that it was a foul. So if they've come to the right decision, then you can't really complain, to be honest. But we made sure at half-time that we didn't let it get to us. We didn't kind of sulk or moan at the referee. We made sure we got on with it, and you could see that in the second half. But yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't to be.
You've had this run of fixtures against 5 tremendously difficult teams to play. Only 1 point from them, but I don't get the feeling anybody's disheartened.
Yeah, I'm disheartened because we've played well enough, not only in the previous games, but today we played well enough to get at least a point. So obviously we're disappointed. We wanted more from today, but like you say, we've got a good run now between now and January, where we need to be picking up points. Hopefully we can pick up more points than we have in the last 6 games and see where it takes us come the new year.
Well, Roy, is it the same story again? You've played well, you nearly got something against the big guns and it didn't quite work out.
Yes, I suppose you could put it that way, but I think this was a very good performance from our side against a team of Liverpool's quality. And I'm very disappointed for the players. I think that they should really be in the dressing room now, congratulating themselves not only on a good performance but on taking at least 1 point from the leaders and a team that's in such great form. But it wasn't to be, because after our equalising goal, they managed to get the winner. But once again, it's a game where I sit here with absolutely no criticism at all of my own team. In fact, full of praise, really, for my own team, if you can be as bold as to praise your own team when you're not winning, because we do know it is about winning, and we weren't able to win.
in any game, the first goal's important. What is your verdict on the one that you had and then didn't have?
I think it was a foul. I think it was rightly disallowed. I'm irritated, of course, because people are suggesting that one of the VAR's biggest mistakes was the goal that Arsenal had disallowed against us, where in actual fact it was exactly the same situation. In fact, it was worse, because our player who was at the near post about to head the ball away was actually pushed out of the way for the flick on, and then a goal ensues. Today, at least, a foul, which I did see as a foul. It wasn't on a player, actually. He was anywhere near the ball. The ball was flicked on by somebody else. So, but we've been on the good end, if you like, of VAR decisions. They were on a bad end of them. I've got no complaints about that. I'm just a little bit irritated that people want to suggest that the goal that Arsenal scored was such an unbelievable injustice, when in actual fact it was a worse foul at the near post than the one we committed today.
And at that stage, would you have said at half-time, if you had the lead, that would have been absolutely fair and fair enough?
Yeah, I think throughout the game there wasn't an awful lot of chances, clear-cut chances for either side, and to keep Liverpool at bay and not give them clear-cut chances is a testament to the defensive work that we did throughout the team. And I think that really throughout the game, if you really looked at the clear-cut chances, we were certainly equal, if not maybe slightly ahead of those. But the fact is, you've got to take your chances, and we only took one of ours and had one chalked off, and they got that late winner, which is a cruel blow, we feel. But it's one of those things. There's nothing to complain about from my side, and if anything, I want to be positive, because I want to feel good about the team and the performance, because I think it was our best performance certainly this season, and maybe we would compare to any in the past as well.
I know Andros Townsend has said, he feels a little disheartened because of the result. How do you now transfer to the players the positivity ahead of a run of 7, shall I say, without meaning to be disrespectful, more regular fixtures?
Yeah, we knew this 5 games was going to be very tough, and we knew that we were staring down the barrel of 5 potential defeats. We hoped we weren't going to get that. We hoped that we were going to do well and play well enough to get points from the game. We got 1 against the Arsenal, and I think we certainly could have been congratulating ourselves on 1 today. But the bottom line is that if we're going to stay in this division and make certain we reach our goal, which is to stay in the division and make certain it's another year of Premiership football for our fans, then it won't be a result of winning or losing necessarily against Liverpool and Manchester City. It will be a question of what we do against the teams who are fighting around us, and we must make certain now that it's not just a question of good performances when the Man Cities and the Liverpools come to visit. We've got to give good performances against all these other teams around us, because those are the games which are going to be crucial to us in terms of our survival.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha and Andros Townsend had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Liverpool. But make sure to come out next week from a post-match review of the game against Burnley. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.